Good afternoon. Welcome to the Pro Bono Partnership Annual Luncheon. I'm Daryl Maxwell, Acting Executive Director of the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. This annual tradition celebrates DC Pro Bono Week. Although the pandemic continues to make it difficult for us to gather in person, we're glad you can join us virtually today. The Pro Bono Partnership is a network of 108 district law firms and government agencies. The partnership sponsors events that allow legal service organizations to present emerging pro bono needs and firms to exchange ideas for enhancing their pro bono activities. Each year, the Pro Bono Center publishes a directory of partnership firms to facilitate pro bono referrals and a directory of providers to better support pro bono needs. This year, we welcome our newest partnership member, Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. We have an exciting program today. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize our court leaders. Anna Blackburn-Rigsby, Chief Judge of the DC Court of Appeals. Anita Josie Herring, Chief Judge of the District of Columbia Superior Court. Beryl Howell, Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. And Sri Srinivasan, Chief Judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. DC Bar President Chad Sarchio, a champion of pro bono and public service, is also here today. Chad will share some remarks later in the program. I'd also like to recognize the dedicated Pro Bono Center staff. Every day, our talented team brings energy, creativity, and enthusiasm to recruit, train, and support pro bono lawyers and to help and empower our neighbors. To bring you this event today, Allison Persich, Connie Sinclair, and Vanessa Batters-Thompson provided invaluable support and expertise. We are joined by representatives from our partners, law firms, federal government agencies, and legal services providers. Each of you and your organizations are vital to ensuring all district residents enjoy equal access to our courts. Now more than ever, lawyers need to step up and support our neighbors as we recover from the pandemic as a community. I'm very pleased to introduce our two special guests, Laura Klein and Vanita Gupta. Laura Klein is chair of the Federal Government Pro Bono Program and manager of the U.S. Department of Justice's Pro Bono Program. The Federal Government Pro Bono Program is one of the district's most important partners in delivering pro bono legal services. The program supports dedicated public servants who represent clients in their individual capacities. Speaking solely for the Pro Bono Center, we place more pro bono clients with federal government lawyers than any other partner. We are grateful for Laura's invaluable guidance as a long-standing member of the DC Bar Pro Bono Committee. As Associate Attorney General of the United States, Vanita Gupta supervises multiple litigating divisions within the Department of Justice, including the civil rights, antitrust, tax, and environmental and natural resources divisions. Before her appointment, she served as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the nation's oldest and largest coalition of nonpartisan civil rights organizations. This is Ms. Gupta's second tour of duty with the Department of Justice. From 2014 to 2017, she was the country's chief civil rights prosecutor. Earlier in her career, she served as Deputy Legal Director at the American Civil Liberties Union and counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. I'm delighted to welcome Laura Klein and Vanita Gupta.
Thank you, Daryl, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, for joining us today for Pro Bono Week. I know many people are eager to hear about the exciting things that are happening at the Department of Justice under your leadership. But before we dive into those topics, I would like to go back to the beginning of your legal career and ask about a formative experience you had when you were working with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Can you talk about the Tulia, Texas cases and how they shaped your views and your strategies that you still use today?
Thank you, Laura. It's great to be here. Yeah, when I was a freshly minted graduate from NYU Law School, I went to work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and just a couple of months after I started there, I became aware, thanks to a documentary, of a drug sting that had taken place in 1999 in a small town called Tulia, Texas, located in the panhandle of Texas, about 5,000 people, about 350 African Americans, where on July 23rd, 1999, over 12% of the town's adult Black population was arrested on the uncorroborated word of a police officer who had been conducting an 18-month drug sting in this town. It turned out, as I said, he had no corroboration for anything he said, and initially the people accused tried to go to trial to establish their innocence, and the cases began to unravel as the police officer responsible for the drug sting, it was found out that he had been arrested for theft and abuse of official capacity while he was on the job in this town, that the prosecutors had hidden this evidence from defense counsel, that he had used racially derogatory language throughout his time conducting the drug sting, and that the evidence, that he had no evidence literally to back up his allegations. Meanwhile, though, until we had gotten involved, people were receiving sentences of between 20, 40, 60, 99, in one case 341 years for allegations of very low-level drug crimes. And so I went down to investigate with, as I said, a newly minted lawyer with the Legal Defense Fund. And I quickly discovered that I was in over my head. These were really my first real cases outside of my clinics in law school, and that I needed to be able to recruit lawyers from law firms around the country. I needed help. The Legal Defense Fund was and is a premier legal shop, but it is also a lean shop, and lawyers are working overload. And so it was really important that I was able to build a whole team out with lawyers from law firms from New York and Washington, Texas, California. And in about the span of 2 years, I'll fast forward, we were able, after a pretty significant set of investigations, a hearing in court over the span of 2 weeks, and many, many filings, to win exonerations from then Governor Rick Perry, and then we had a civil settlement to try to give some compensation to those who are wrongfully accused. And so my experience as a young lawyer was immediately also an experience building out a team of pro bono lawyers who, without them, we wouldn't have been able to get those exonerations.
How did you go about mobilizing those pro bono attorneys? How did you reach out to them?
So I just used some common sense and came back to New York with a suitcase full of documents and interviews with family members, and I just thought, how do I get in touch with firms? So I did it through a variety of means. One was that there were pro bono legal networks, organizations in New York that I knew were kind of organizing lawyers across law firms on various projects. I contacted them. I contacted friends who knew friends who were partners at law firms. I asked around about who was heading up pro bono, offices in these law firms. I did meetings. I remember late night meetings with pro bono coordinators at firms. I mean, it was a whole hodgepodge of an assortment of ways to try to get people involved. I will say, though, that once I started telling the story of what I knew, of the stories of family members that I met in this town, it was quite incredible how quickly people were motivated and eager to help out. And even though I was, pretty inexperienced as a lawyer, and I was working with some incredible partners with immense experience, they really respected the fact that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund was kind of anchoring this massive effort, and understood that the relationships with the families and communities was so important and needed to be at the center of our work. But I remained friends with so many of those lawyers from the firms who went on to continue to do really fantastic pro bono work, and I'm so glad that we remain in relationship now.
Well, it is a very compelling story, and I can see where pro bono attorneys would be excited about working with you on it. Your career has focused on civil rights and bringing justice to minority and underrepresented communities. Legal services attorneys see the connection between minority status and lack of representation every day, but it may not be obvious to attorneys who aren't engaged in that work or who are trying it for the first time as a pro bono attorney. Can you talk about the intersection of racial equity and civil legal assistance? Do you see poverty as a racial issue?
I think it's hard to deny that the justice gap in this country tracks often also a racial equity gap. You don't have to, look too far. You go to any courthouse in Washington, D.C., but you can go to probably many courthouses, most courthouses across the country to see why that is actually true. And so many of the underlying needs that bring people to court, whether, the kinds of things like access to housing, jobs, employment, healthcare, and then, of course, you've got the criminal justice system. They are also kind of, you see racial disparities and racial inequity in those systems that drive people to need to get to go to court. And so with civil legal services access, we have a long way to go in this country. We've come a long way, but there remains a persistent gap, and the poverty rate, there remains racial inequity in our poverty rates. The U.S. Census Bureau recently reported that Black Americans are 2 times more likely to be in poverty, Hispanic or Latinx communities 1.5 times more likely. And the pandemic has made that even worse. In many ways, the pandemic has revealed what were already structural inequities in access to the types of things that I was just talking about, and the need for civil legal services to help try to close that gap is obviously essential. But then when you have an access gap to even getting a lawyer, that can compound the problem. So it's a really important area of work for our legal system and for the pro bono community to try to help close that gap. We need structural fixes. We need lawyers to help. And we're seeing that obviously play out right now in the evictions crisis, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about, but it is this is work that remains ongoing for our legal community here in this country.
Thank you. And yes, actually, I did want to talk with you about the pandemic and its direct impact on low-income communities, particularly the looming eviction crisis. The Attorney General recently issued a call to action for attorneys to volunteer to assist people in seeking emergency rental assistance and in eviction cases. And I'm proud to say that the Department of Justice Pro Bono program is actively responding to that call and is mobilizing our talented pool of attorneys nationwide to get involved. But you have been proactive in your role at DOJ to bring key stakeholders together, such as the courts and legal service providers. Can you talk about that effort?
Yeah, it's these conversations actually started in the Justice Department when my team was speaking to the National Center on State Courts back in the spring, and there was already an acute awareness that the end of eviction moratoria around the country, which at that point was imminent, could create a real crisis for housing courts around the country. The downstream effects, as we all know, of being unhoused are tremendous. And so it felt imperative and urgent for the Justice Department to figure out what we could do to alleviate this crisis. And in June, I sent a letter after examining a lot of practices in housing courts around the country, sent a letter to chief justices and state court administrators, really lifting up some of the key eviction diversion programs that courts around the country were operating, places like Michigan and Texas and Philadelphia and other parts of the country, describing the kinds of eviction diversion programs that could help mitigate the crisis, keep people in their homes. Congress had allocated, close to $45 billion of emergency rental assistance, too much of which was going unclaimed, and there was a lack of awareness about how to access that money. There were impediments. People, in some states, it was made too difficult for people, landlords and tenants, to access. So we wanted to think creatively with the courts across the country about how best to make sure that people had access, that they understood that there was funding available, and that the courts could be a place to actually get that education out there. And then, of course, the importance of having lawyers assist in that process. There's no question, and there's a number of studies that show that having lawyers assist both landlords and tenants in housing court access, these types of assistance funds could keep people in their homes. So I sent that letter out, and then in July, as we were seeing the Delta variant, come back on the rise, we were again also really motivated by the concern that a public health crisis would be worsened if people ended up being evicted. And I say unnecessarily or unlawfully evicted because in too many instances we could prevent these types of evictions. And so the Attorney General hosted a really important meeting where in 48 hours notice was able to get just under 40 state chief justices together for, I think, kind of a historic meeting. And the Attorney General and I talked with the chief justices, heard from them about what the obstacles were from their end with keeping people housed. Bar none, every single chief justice was acutely aware of the crisis and of the role that the state courts could play in trying to mitigate it. But they also said they needed help, and they needed advocates and lawyers to help provide assistance in their courts and do trainings and the like to get people access to rental assistance to be there in court for contested hearings. And so then the Attorney General sent out a call to action to lawyers across the country. I was really honored to, in quite short order, there were about 99 law school deans in a weekend that signed up to pledge to get their law school clinics and students organized to provide this type of assistance. We did a call to action and did trainings with hundreds of private bar lawyers. You are mobilizing the Justice Department and pro bono networks across the government to help assist. So this really is an all hands on deck effort. And it's what the Justice Department should be doing, working with state courts, working to help support them, as well as leading the charge and modeling some of what we might be able to do to keep people in their homes.
One of the exciting achievements of the Obama administration was the creation of the Office for Access to Justice. That office used, similar to the kinds of things you're talking about, official government action to reduce barriers to our legal system and to address systemic obstacles to justice. Can you share with us the vision for this revitalized office?
Yeah, so, I think the Justice Department has a critical role to play in ensuring access to justice. It has been a struggle that has been with us since the founding of our country, and there is a role for us to play that I think can be quite impactful. On May 18th, the Attorney General announced that he wanted a review and a report about how best we could help close the gap in access to justice. We see it, as we said, in areas of housing courts and bankruptcy courts, criminal justice proceedings, and the like. And he wants to reinvigorate the Justice Department's role in leading access to justice initiatives across the federal government as well. And the president issued a memo kind of reestablishing the Legal Aid Interagency Roundtable because many federal agencies have a role to play in ensuring that the benefits and programs that they are administering can be accessed equitably as well. And so our goal right now in doing this review and this report is to alleviate some of the entrenched disparities that we see in our justice system. We've met with many stakeholders, legal service providers, judges, community advocates, civil rights advocates, public defenders, prosecutors, you name it, the stakeholder we have met with to get their ideas about how best the Justice Department can play a role. We don't just want to recreate what was there before. We understand that the pandemic has in many ways, as I said, revealed particular disparities that if we can reach for stronger solutions now, we might be able to avoid the problems in the past. And so you will see our report coming out soon, and the goal of it will be to take a comprehensive approach to how we address these issues in a whole broad range of contexts. so that we can have a whole of government approach to access to justice issues. And we're very much, I think I look at our evictions work as part and parcel. We aren't just waiting to do this work until there's a formal reestablishment of the office. That work has already begun and is well in earnest here at DOJ.
Access to justice depends on the legal profession to step up and make the system work for everyone. In addition to systemic and structural reform, pro bono representation of individuals is a big part of that effort. In other words, helping people one at a time is as important as big impact litigation. For attorneys who've never tried it, what can you tell them as someone who has been deeply involved in providing representation to people who cannot afford an attorney, to encourage them to participate?
I think the Juris Doctor brings with it a great amount of responsibility and obligation to close the justice gap for those that are the most vulnerable among us. And I have always believed that. I have found that among the private bar that it's often the pro bono work that they are doing that gives them the greatest satisfaction in their jobs. And I would just encourage anyone who hasn't tried it before, but even if you have, to do more, to get involved in providing pro bono representation to help meet the acute needs of people in communities across the country. There is a lot of different areas of work to get involved in, and I think that if for nothing else, I think there's a great deal of satisfaction that comes with doing that work, but I also think it exposes all of us to the remaining inequities that we have to continue to work on. And it's an important service to do that each of us who has the power and privilege of having a law degree can kind of use it for the better good and to help create a more kind of equal, to help expand access to justice and equal justice in this country.
Thank you, I love that. A few years ago, you gave a speech at Brandeis University where you described hope as a discipline and a muscle that we need to exercise to maintain. In your work, you confront injustice and unfairness daily. How do you maintain this sense of hope that keeps you going?
So I am a lifelong civil rights lawyer, and you can't do civil rights work without having a profound well of hope. And so I do say that hope is a discipline because it doesn't just fall into your lap every day. You have to work at it and remain hopeful because it is, I think it's hopeful people that help to drive change, that to help to close justice gaps. We were just talking about the privilege of having a JD, and I think that despair sometimes in the face of really big problems is something that privileged people can feel, but when you are actually experiencing inequality or courthouses are closed to you or there is injustice in the world, it has always been hopeful people that have persisted, that have remained committed to confronting those entrenched inequalities, that have found the ways to be creative and strategic to help challenge them and to use the law for the betterment of our communities. And so to me, it is kind of a driving fuel for the work that I do. It's why I'm so honored to be here at the Justice Department. In many ways, the founding of the Justice Department in the context of Reconstruction and the enactment of the 14th Amendment was a profound project of hope, and we haven't fully achieved it yet. But to be here every day and to be doing what I can in a community of lawyers that is so mission-driven, I think is really an honor. And I hope that all lawyers, through doing pro bono work at some point in their careers, will be able to feel that hope through the public service of pro bono practice.
Yes, I also would hope that doing pro bono would make people feel more hopeful and not less.
I agree.
You are the first woman of color and the first Asian American woman to serve as Associate Attorney General and previously as the head of the Civil Rights Division. You were the first woman and the first child of immigrants to lead the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Being the first can bring new insight to any position, but it can also bring the weight of expectation. Has being the first in these roles impacted how you have served?
You know, when you are the first, it's hard to ignore the fact that you are often coming in, standing on the shoulders of giants. And I say that because it is the people who've come before me that had the hope and that persisted and broke down barriers, changed laws, changed expectations and stereotypes that allow for somebody who looks like me to be in the positions that I am. And so when I come into this position, I also have a great deal of responsibility to bring others with me, whether it's through mentorship of younger lawyers, younger women of color here at DOJ or out in the world, whether it's about paying back and being able to ensure that we have a fair and humane immigration system. That was the way that my parents were able to come to this country in the late 60s. So in a myriad of ways, I feel a great obligation to also pay back. And through taking the time to support lawyers who are going to come after me and take these great positions and occupy these mantles and feel very mission-driven in the way that I do. So as I said, it's been an honor to be in these positions. But it is never enough to kind of rest in these positions. It comes with a great deal of responsibility.
We are inspired by your optimism and your leadership. Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Chad Sarchio, this year's DC Bar President. I'd like to thank Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta and Federal Government Pro Bono Program Chair Laura Klein for their conversation today as part of our efforts to mark DC Pro Bono Week. As a former prosecutor, defense attorney, military judge, and lecturer in trial and appellate advocacy, I appreciate and am humbled by the passion, creativity, and perhaps most importantly, hope that have permeated their work. They are hallmarks of the kind of leadership and public service that our country needs right now. So I wholeheartedly support the Associate Attorney General's continued efforts to strengthen and coordinate a federal response to the significant civil legal challenges facing Americans as we begin to break free from the pandemic's grip. For our part, the DC Bar continues to serve its members so they can serve the community. As the Bar enters its 50th year of such service, we see a dire need for civil legal services within the district. An estimated 14,000 district residents face eviction from their homes. I cannot overstate how traumatic eviction or even the threat of eviction can be for families and individuals. New laws and programs aim to assist tenants who fell behind on rent during the pandemic, but these will not reach all tenants. We need all hands on deck to ensure district tenants understand their rights and can exercise their options. But legal assistance needed to help our most vulnerable neighbors recover from the pandemic does not stop with eviction defense. Many families, unfortunately, have experienced domestic violence, child abuse, or the loss of loved ones, making these challenging times even more daunting. They will need advice and representation as they navigate family court and other proceedings. Neighbors struggling with health conditions caused or complicated by COVID-19 need help handling disability benefits appeals. And small businesses and nonprofits need current, accurate guidance to weather financial crises and remain key elements of the fabric of our neighborhoods. Remember, when you support one district resident through pro bono legal services, you build faith and confidence in our entire justice system. We can and we must strive to ensure that every person, regardless of their ability to pay for a lawyer, enjoys full access to our legal system. As attorneys, we each play a role in aspiring to reach our country's highest ideals of justice, compassion, and equal treatment under the law. If past this prologue, then it is clear that the district's legal community can meet this ongoing emergency. We have a rich, long-standing tradition of commitment to public service in which we can all take pride. In 2020 alone, district law firms and other volunteers performed more than 1 million hours of pro bono work. Imagine what we can do in rising to the challenges ahead. Thank you for what you already do every day to ensure access to justice. You are the nation's gold standard for pro bono work. But please, during the DC Bar's Gold Anniversary year, I urge you and your organizations to dig deeper and devote as much of your time, treasure, and talents to help the entire district rebound from this pandemic. We're grateful you could join us today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I hope that next year we can all gather for Pro Bono Week and the Partnership Luncheon in person.